Hi there, Mark Vergier here. Yeah, I'm on a bit of a Commodore 64 kick. What else can you do in December? December 2020, pandemic. There's not a lot you can do actually, but for those who had a Commodore 64, sometime in their life or still have, storing files on it can be a bit of a thing. You had tapes, all sorts of new developments have arrived over the years, and this video actually shows you my experience with one of these enhancements, ranging way back from 2015 all the way up to now. So this is a Chameleon C64 special, Turbo C64 special. Hope you enjoy. The Commodore 64, still for a lot of people the home computer of choice. Storage solutions for this great system, the Commodore 64. It's a computer system that stems from the era where you'd use tapes or floppy disks, big floppies, to save and store your data. And over the decades that the system is still in use, people have adopted to use other means of storing information. And I have a couple of them, and the last one, which is the Chameleon, the Turbo Chameleon 64, is really an amazing piece of kit that I wanted to show you in this video. But let's have an overview of the rest of storage solutions that I actually am using for the Commodore 64. If you look at the back of the Commodore 64, this is the keyboard, this is the back. This is actually a slot, a cartridge slot that actually is very similar to the ones that you find on console systems. This actually can house modules with programs on it and basically expands the system. This is actually the cartridge port. For the rest you have an RF out and an RF signal tuner thingy. Then you have a serial port and a TV out, video out, the cassette port and the user port. And yeah, basically you would hook up on the serial port, you'd hook up, I think this is the video port, this is the serial port. On the serial port you'd hook up disk drives, printers and all sorts of stuff. You would daisy chain them, and yeah, basically that was the fastest way to retrieve and store information. You could also use a special cassette tape deck on this Commodore to save and load data, but that was super slow, even slower than the Speccy. One way to store information is on a compact cassette. This is very similar to an audio tape, only 15 minutes long, and basically this would store one program. And that was really slow and tedious. So this 5¼ inch floppy disk is actually the way to use programs on the C64. They would come in these little envelopes. Oops. And yeah, this basically is the way to store information. Often you would cut another hole on this side so you can actually flip the disks around and use both sides on a single-sided disk. And this stores more information than the tape and the drive together. But yeah, the SD card, the compact SD card, this is the media where a lot of today's Commodore 64 solid-state storage solutions work with. And one fine example of this is the SED2IO or something. I forgot which exact type this is, but this actually comes in a very small facsimile of the 1541 disk drive. You slot the SD card in there, you hook up this to the serial port, and this bit you hook up to the cassette port, just for power, not to load programs in. This basically allows you to access the disk, the SD card, browse the directory, enter a disk image, or just load a single file off the SD card. Basically it's just for loading single file programs. And for more advanced users, this will not work because you want to compile your sources, you want to have file in and outputs. So you basically will need a way to save and store data files, program files and all sorts of stuff. So basically, although this looks like a 1541 disk drive, you really need a storage solution that actually behaves like a Commodore disk drive. Well, this is 40 to 60 pounds or euros, very affordable. The drive emulations are much more expensive, about 3 times as much. Let's check out the 1541 Ultimate 2. This is a special version that has been turned into some sort of final cartridge facsimile, but it's the 1541 Ultimate 2. It's been rebranded by a Dutch company. Basically, inside there is this programmable chip that actually behaves like the disk drive that actually runs these disks. And on the Commodore 64, the disk drive was huge. It was just as huge, just as big as the computer itself. I may actually show you one. Let me put that aside. This actually is the 1541 disk drive. I'll put the computer on top of the disk drive, and basically you can actually see that the disk drive is actually bigger than the Commodore 64. It actually houses the same processor, a little less RAM, but basically it's a computer in its own right. So it was a very complicated bit of machinery. A lot of fast loaders would actually have programs running inside of this, together with a program on the Commodore 64, in order to enhance and speed up the file transfer from the disk drive to the Commodore. But emulating that you cannot do with just a simple, well, file in and output SD card reader. This actually is a solution if you just run program files and you just want to run games and stuff. For a lot of people this will just be fine. But if you want more, and let me take away the disk drive, it's huge and large, you need something more, and then this comes into play. Basically what it does, it's a program that runs on the cartridge port. It actually also wedges itself into the Commodore 64 BIOS, so it enhances the BIOS and it allows it to work like a disk drive. So it emulates the disk drive by imitating bits of the disk drive and feeding that data into the computer. So basically you have a bit that expands the functionality of the BIOS, the RAM. There's a program running in the C64's memory, but then the disk drive is also emulated in this bit, and then it feeds the data into the serial port. And it also has a feature, and I don't have that the cable here with me, that you can actually hook up a data cable to the cassette port, and actually it does the same. It can also read files of the SD card, which is in here, or the USB stick, and have those files be fed into the data set. So it actually can imitate a tape deck as well. This will set you back about 149, 150 pounds or euros. A very nice piece of kit, a great device to enhance your system. And then I learned about something else, a cartridge that does all this, but just being a cartridge on the Commodore 64, and that's actually this piece of kit, and this is the Chameleon, Turbo Chameleon 64, which is a cartridge like the other one, but it doesn't need the cable to imitate the disk drive. No, what this does, and this actually is a far more advanced cartridge even. This basically houses a programmable computer inside. It's a system that is called FPGA. You can actually program this with a special language, which is the virtual hardware language. You can actually define a complete computer inside of this. They've had all the functionality that was in this one, mounting disks, reading the disks, saving the disks, all sorts of stuff that a normal disk drive would actually do, but then on the SD card or a memory stick. But like the other one, it has 3 buttons that all have different functions: reset, activate the menu and what have you. But it adds something extra. This actually has a VGA output. This cartridge can actually output video to a VGA monitor. There's a connector for a PS2 keyboard, power adapter and a PS2 mouse. And on this bit there's an infrared eye. You can actually use a Commodore CDTV remote control, which basically is a remote and a joystick interface. I have this here. Not sure if you can see, but yeah, it's a Commodore. This actually works with this cartridge as well. But this cartridge actually, it also has a stereo audio out, a USB mini interface for transferring or flashing the ROM. This actually is something that is a computer, a self-contained computer. You can put this in a docking station and it will actually function as a Commodore 64 itself or different computers even. But what this does, if you put it inside a Commodore 64, it actually overtakes the complete Commodore 64. There's different versions of the Commodore 64 BIOS in here. And this actually wedges inside of the system, but this even overtakes it. It also contains extra memory, so you can also have RAM expansions and stuff. It's also a speed enhancer, so you can actually run this 50 times faster than the original Commodore 64 would. So basically, if you put this inside of the Commodore 64, this severely enhances the functionality of the machine. If you don't use it with the Commodore 64, you can also use it as a Commodore 64, but also as an MSX or an Atari 2600, an Amiga, all sorts of stuff. And basically what the fun thing is that this cartridge actually contains Commodore 64 files, it contains MSX files, it contains ZX Spectrum files, it contains all sorts of operating systems in just a single file system. And from the menu system, you just select which core you want to use. It'll show you a menu where you can actually use it as a Commodore 64 in its own right, or use different cores and have it function as a separate computer. Is this emulation? Well, to some extent, but it's not software emulation. What this does actually is using this VHL, this virtual hardware language, you can actually define the schematics of a complete computer system inside of this chip. And you can, well, basically hardware emulate a complete system. So it's cycle exact. The difficult bit is how to interface the original hardware with, well, the new VGA port, I mean the Commodore 64, of course. There's also different FPGA computer sets, and they're all different when it comes to the hardware specs. So you can't just use a core running on this on one of the other systems, but basically it functions the same way. I hope I'm actually making sense. What I want to do next is actually hook this up in its docking station and show you what this baby can do. Why is this not a huge success? Well, it's expensive. So let's check out how this looks when you hook it up on the docking station. Not sure if you can see, but this actually is the docking station. The cartridge actually fits like so. I'll slot it in momentarily. There's a chip, basically that's the interface chip, and you can actually hook up an Amiga keyboard, you can hook up a Mini-Mig, and you can also hook up the original C64 keyboard. It also provides for joystick ports, Atari Commodore 64 joystick ports. And I've actually hooked up this stick, which uses both joystick ports, and you can have a little switching between the two different ports, because all the Commodore 64 games, they always were using the different joystick ports than the port that the joystick was put in the first, or whatever. It also uses a power supply, and this actually is the breakout cable, and I'm using this Dell keyboard for it. So yeah, low-tech Mark Vergeer video, and let's put this all together. The VGA cable, the audio out cable, and I'm hooking this up on on this Samsung monitor. So yeah, we'll be right back. The menu that you see when you put the Chameleon on a Commodore 64. It has a nice Commodore 64 font, but I'll show you what happens when you just turn it on for the first time. So this is turned off, and then it initializes, and then you have basically the Commodore 64 functionality on this cartridge. So you can browse the files, and I have Amiga files on here. I have Atari 5200 games on here. Atari, this is all software that it's capable of running. It has Commodore 64 files on here. It has MSX files. It has PC Engine files, Speccy files, all sorts of stuff. And let's go into the Commodore 64 files and go into demos and just run, for example, Edge of Disgrace. It mounts the disk image and it'll just run the demo, and this is a multi-part demo which uses the 1541 disk drive extensively. So, and you can hear the music going. The Commodore 64 screen border is a little offset. It's not completely centered. That's the only drawback. And basically the Commodore 64 emulation is perfect. It does all the legal opcodes and stuff, and it's really a very nice hardware implementation, re-implementation of the hardware. Actually, it's very similar to that joystick over there, which is Jerry Ellsworth's C64 on a chip. Basically, it uses similar hardware techniques, and yeah, by pressing F11, you just go back to the file browser. So let's see, you can also run cartridges. Let's run, for example, that new Commando Arcade Special Edition card. You just select which cartridge slot. There's 4 slots available. You just run it, and there you have the game. By pressing F11, you move back to the menu system, and where it becomes very interesting. Let's go to System Info. So the iOS that I'm using, the OS that I'm using is from February 2nd, 2015. It's the Beta 9C. You can actually see that the cartridge detects that it is running from a docking station. VIC Type 2, you can set it to PAL, you can set it to NTSC, you can have it sync, you can have it mimic the VIC2 of the computer that it's running on, but this is running by itself. It detects that the SD card is inserted, that it's formatted at FAT16, which of course is compatible with FAT32, but it's compatible with the MSX, and we'll see in a minute why that is so important. Let's press return to exit, and let's see which cores are actually available. There's a lot of emulation cores or hardware cores that you can actually use. The Chameleon is the Beta 9. That's actually the standard core that is actually running. This is basically a Commodore 64. But let's go to the Amiga implementation. You'll notice that the resolution changes, and this is actually the Mini-Meg Amiga implementation. And you can actually have the SD card function as a complete Amiga hard drive. So I'm actually thinking about formatting one of the SD cards that I have as an Amiga hard drive, and use WHD load and have Amiga games running off this system. You can hook up a PS2 keyboard and a PS2 mouse, and basically it'll mimic an Amiga. But let's press F12. You can actually have a little menu, a little configuration menu, where you can insert ADF files. Let's see if I can... Bionic Commando, I'm not sure if that will work, but let's insert that and exit. And as you can see, it just boots into the what is it, the Amiga file system and OS, and then hopefully it'll start the game. Software failure. Of course, I am showing you a game. Yeah, I've not Batman. Exit. Oh wait, you have to reset it, of course. Reset. Yes. Let's see if it'll run the other image. Illegal track read. Well, of course, me trying to demonstrate this and then reset. Yes. Well, it's supposed to be very compatible. I've not extensively tried it yet, but of course it would be fun if at least one of the games that I selected runs. It does yeah, it does a what is it? It does an Amiga ECS at most, so an Amiga 600 with a hard drive at best. Let's see if I can get in game. Okay. I can't get out of this. Well, it runs. You'll just have to believe me. If I press the reset button, it'll just reset the Amiga. What is it? The Amiga Minimig version. So you really have to reset the system. And basically, you have to do a power cycle for it to just completely get rid of the core. Let's run a different core, and that's the VIC-20 one. So, and it says 4 unexpanded, and basically you have a VIC-20 in hardware re-implemented. Actually, you can actually see some status information. I'm not sure if it is really viewable, but this core basically is just a proof of concept. It's not that functional, and you can actually flash this core together with the BIOS, with the file of one of those VIC-20 multi-cards, and then you'll have quite a few VIC-20 games at your disposal. The keyboard actually works. Let me see if I do it. Port 1. Oh well, let's see if I can reset it. I think I need to power cycle this also, so let's do a power cycle. And move to the launch core and go for the MSX. This is very cool, the MSX. This is actually a very compatible MSX. It does an MSX2, and what I have set it up as, it actually boots a handy menu system that I have running on my real MSX as well. Basically, it is some sort of Northern Commander like thingy, but basically you can do all sorts of file operations through the MSX on the SD card, the entire SD card. So you can actually use all sorts of different, well, you can do file operations. So basically it enhances it tremendously. But let's go to MSX, and you can go into a directory like this. You can exit the Not sure if I press this, if it does go into basic. Let's see if I can run the basic from this. I'm not sure, if I've never tried this, but it could be that it just goes to basic. It'll run the program. And this is actually fun because this MSX2 demo mimics a Commodore 64 screen, and just it tries to load the demo, but then it says it doesn't work and you need an MSX. So they're going to upgrade it, and then it boots into an MSX1 and then it'll run the demo. Quite interesting and quite confusing, because actually this system for real can emulate all sorts of all these systems. So yeah, basically a bit of a joke, and if you run this on this multiple capable machine, it's actually quite it can be quite confusing. Okay, let's see if I can reset this. And it'll load. Yeah, it'll load the menu system. It has 8 megabytes of RAM, and it's also possible to load in games, ROM files. These games are basic games, and if you just go to AutoExec bus, it probably will load in the R-type. But in order to use these games, you need a huge bit of memory, because it'll load in the entire ROM into memory with the memory expansion, and it not always works, also not on a real MSX. The MSX DOS actually is very similar to MSX DOS. I'll show you. It uses very similar commands. And basically this is the entire contents of the SD card. You can go back to the menu by doing that. I changed the path just like you would on a PC, so that it'll always be able to find and load this menu system. But let's do a Rom load. Q there /W, because you have a and it basically runs mostly Konami games, but if you type Rom Load, oh, you have to wait for it to Rom Load, and then, for example, which Spaceman Bo, SPman B dot run, and then use the start. So it'll load Spaceman Bo, and it also will do a sound cartridge, and it basically loads Konami games, and it'll run them. And let me see. Let's go. I'll try to play this a bit. Well, as you can see, it does MSX2 Plus emulation because it has the smooth scrolling. And I think this actually is running at 60 Hertz. You can actually change this to run at the PAL frequency. But yeah, press F12 and you reset the system. But resetting a cartridge, inserted cartridge, will only reset it and rerun the game. So you have to do a power cycle to get rid of those cartridges. So let's do a power cycle. And reload another core. Another core is the PC Engine. And load ROM, let's see, PCE, and blazing lasers. Of course, looking at it from a hardware perspective, the PC Engine also uses the same CPU as the Commodore 64. And the system is quite a clean system, so it was possible to modify. Let me see. Well, you can actually use the joystick to just play the game. I'm playing this single-handedly, so I'm not the best. I'm using my my little finger to steer. It's not the best way to play, but yeah, as you can see, it runs all the game files without any issue. Let's do a power cycle, because if you have a core running, it's not always possible to exit that core. I'll launch a core. What it also does is the ZX Spectrum, and one of them I'm having issues with because it's refresh issues, but let's see. And basically it's the Spectrum. I'm still configuring it to load in data. It basically allows you to use an interface, the SD interface, that is similar to this. Let me see. This is an div IDE, which allows you to use compact flash on a Spectrum. Basically, the same functionality is put into that core, allowing you to use the Spectrum with all the file in and output, but then using the SD card. So I yet have to figure that out. So let's do another power cycle. Reboot the card and 2600, Atari 2600. This also is a proof of concept. Sadly, the screen is a little squashed, but you have a lot of built-in games that actually will work with that joystick as well. And you just use the cursor keys just to move around the various games. There's a ton of games in there. But let's do the final core, and that's the Atari 8-bit core. Well, would you believe it or not, this is actually where my battery kicked out. So yeah, no 8-bit Atari 800, 400 footage. I'll put up a more comprehensive video a bit later. I actually did this video severely sleep deprived. The Chameleon 64. It's a very nice cartridge, but you can also use it in standalone mode. And I have this docking station with two Competition Pro joysticks, a Dell keyboard, PS2 keyboard, and it's hooked up over VGA, and it uses an SD card. I have these speakers connected, and let's press reset. Now it defaults into one of the cores. It's an FPGA system, and what I love about the FPGA systems is that it allows it to mimic in hardware different computers. Of course it does the Commodore 64 in all sorts of variants, but it also does the MSX, and let's press restart. So the core loads the BIOS from the SD card, and it actually makes it into an MSX 2 Plus machine with 8 GB of RAM, which is just insane. And it boots into the shell that I normally use on pretty much all my MSX systems. Yeah, this is quite a bit of a weird hybrid, because there's software for just about any system it emulates on it. Commodore 64 software, MSX. You can see Spectrum software, Atari 800, 8-bit machine, Atari 5200, PC Engine, a lot of stuff. But let's go into MSX demos, and there's just one demo that is just insane. If I press enter in this shell, it just goes to basic, and it loads the auto-exec bus. So let's sit back and see what it does. Now this is a bit of a demo inception. So it boots into MSX 2. So it says it wants to downgrade because you want to run an MSX1 demo. And by downgrading, they actually mimicked the Commodore 64 screen. They mimic loading in a game. This is an MSX doing this. And the first time I saw this is just awesome. And now it just fakes an MSX1. It loads the demo. Perhaps do the volume just a tad lower. So this is an MSX demo running on a Commodore 64 card. And it does multi-load from the SD card as well, because it just treats it as a storage device. So there's this ball thing going on. Okay, let's see what this machine can do more. So I'll just remove the power from it. So it boots into and this is all. This can also be controlled by joystick, so you can actually have it without the keyboard as well. So there's a couple of cores you can load with it. Hardware test. There's an Amiga, Commodore VIC-20, for example. So let's see if I can almost make it a Commodore 64. Now you have a VIC-20. Print. Hello world. And it says hello world. So that was the VIC-20. You can actually also run software from it. And you saw in the screen that it actually detects that it's using the docking station. The sad part about this is actually quite a rare machine, which also makes it quite difficult. Yeah, it also does Atari 2600. Let me see if I can reset it. Yeah. It makes that not a lot of new cores come out, and that development of the cores is actually quite limited. So, but you can actually run Spectrum on it as well. Yeah, I really have to find out the documentation, but I just put the core on it. But yeah, a Commodore 64 cartridge doing a Spectrum of some sorts. I'll do a more extensive video on this device a bit later on, but let's see. Set to basic. It is possible to use it to load some stuff. Launch core, reset with cartridge. Oh gosh, I totally forgot. On the Commodore 64, it just defaults into something that is very similar to a 1541 Ultimate. Options. File browser, that's it, the file browser. C64. Carts, the Beam Rider cart, and I believe if I just do this, I can just put it in the cartridge slot, and it just runs. So running cartridge files is actually quite handy. And I believe, yep, file browser. So Centipede. Yeah, so running the C64 cartridges is actually quite doable. But you can also run disk images, demos, Edge of Disgrace. And it does multi-loads as well. It should do them. But of course it's actually also doing 1541 Ultimate or 1541 Drive emulation. So this actually outputs a very clear and nice picture. It's VGH RGB. And you can hear that not always the sound is. It could be that there's interference from one of the cables or something, but it could also be that the SID emulation is not 100%. Yeah, I have my my C64 Reloaded. I've set that over there. I can use that cartridge on the real 64 or the Reloaded one as well. Just to have it more enhanced, and it's basically it's a very expensive 1541 Ultimate in a way. It also runs on the C128, and it's just one of those storage devices. And I just love this this demo. They've made a new demo this year, I believe, so might be worth checking that out. But this is just one of these awesome demos. And to have it run on something that's, well, the only thing that's from the era probably are the Competition Pro joysticks. But yeah, that this runs is just awesome. I mean, and the compatibility of the C64 implementation is just amazing. The good thing is that you can actually put it in C64 NTSC and in C64 PAL mode. And for demos, PAL, and for a lot of the European games, PAL is just the way to go. But for example, a lot of the cartridge software actually originated in the Americas, in NTSC country, and if you want to play those at proper speeds, you more or less can configure this system in NTSC mode. I'm not sure actually if you are able to do that when you put it in a real C64. I believe it clones all the signals from the VIC chip and the SID chip into its own little memory. It's a very intricate device. I'd love to know more about it. I obtained this actually broken. The seller told me it was broken. I believe I've told the story before, but they said it was broken. They said power light would come on and it was just broken, it didn't work anymore. And I thought, well, probably it's just a matter of reflashing it. And it turned out that the power supply he gave with it, it was a very cheap power supply, one of these things with two USB cables, USB slots, and it just provided too little power. I mean, the light came on, but it didn't provide enough power. And I also proceeded to reflash the cartridge with proper cores and stuff, and it just works. You just need a 2 amp power supply. Very good. These ones actually are quite good. These are they came with, I'm not sure what they came with, but Light On is a pretty good brand, and they provide enough power to stuff like that. Raspberry Pi also runs great on this. They also need quite a good strong power supply. So yeah, and I just love this Dell keyboard. I mean, it's the closest thing I have. It's the closest thing I have to an IBM, and this is just my go-to keyboard whenever I'm able to hook it up over a PS2 adapter. Yeah, it's also possible to hook up a mouse, because this thing also does emulation of the Amiga. I haven't tried it properly yet. I may do a more extensive video. I've done some videos on this in the past. So you may actually want to go check those out. And if you have any questions or you have some inquiries on this, I'll be more than willing to answer those. But yeah, this is just a quick video on the Chameleon 64 while I wait for my SSD to arrive so I can import it into, transplant it into my MacBook, my old MacBook, because it's getting a bit too long in the tooth and too slow. Yeah, the cow theme is also quite good. Yeah, I may actually do just a brutally honest room tour of my study as well. Yeah, probably will do that next. Okay, Mark signing off, and I'll be back with another video soon. I just love this. Of course, you actually need to set it in 4:3, but yeah, who cares? Some do. Some do. Some really go mental if you put it out of, in widescreen, but yeah. This is actually the same company that makes the 1541 Ultimate. 1541 Ultimate, no, that's a different one. The C64 Reloaded. And they also do quite a few Amiga expansion boards. Very cool stuff. Anyways, Mark signing off, and I'll be back with another video soon. Hi there people, Mark Verheer here, chilling out in my study, and I've replaced my Amiga for another system. Let's go check it out. It is time to fool around with the Turbo Chameleon again. I have this Turbo Chameleon 64 cartridge, which is hooked up over a VGA to this Samsung TV. There's a Creative travel sound speaker connected over a jack plug on the side, and two Competition Pro reproduction joysticks are actually connected. And over PS2 connected, there's this Dell motherboard. So let's turn on the power. Now basically this system will in a bit boot up in a mode that is also the same if you put it in a Commodore 64. You basically get to for example mount a card, just put it in slot 1 and it'll actually run a card. Now you can also mount drives, like for example you just browsed to it and it just loads it in. Now the borders are a bit offset, that's a bit weird, but yeah, that's just how it is. And here you can actually see that the 1541, because this is actually a turbo load system, and it actually recognized the 1541 because it emulates the C64, but also the 1541 disk drive. Now this is much more than just a Commodore 64 FPGA. It actually comes with a couple of cores that I managed to configure. This is a very ad hoc solution. Now I'm actually running an old version of the software because it's actually up to a beta G, I believe, and this is a beta 9C. The thing is, don't change it if it's working, I say, and I have yet to find a reason to actually use a newer firmware, but what it actually is capable of doing is actually running Amiga software as well. It does the Minimig. And it really functions as a Minimig. It emulates an Amiga 500. If you press F12, it brings up the menu. And I've got a couple of files on here. Alien Syndrome, for example. And it'll just boot from it, hopefully. This is a game I've yet to try, but of course it's a game that might not work, or it may actually work. Yep. So a lot of ADF files just run from it, and it's actually like running it from a real Amiga. And you can hook up a PS2 mouse. I haven't done so yet, but you can hook up a PS2 mouse and have it configured as, and it just does everything. So I have to cut power to it because there's no way to exit the core. If you press one of the buttons, it'll just power cycle and just come back as an Amiga. What else is possible? It's possible to use it as an MSX. And this is normal. If you run it for the first time, it fails to load the BIOS from the SD card, but if you press the right button, I mean, it loads in the BIOS, and it actually boots into an MSX Turbo or an MSX Plus machine, MSX Plus machine with 8 megabytes of RAM. And on my real system, I actually end up using this shell quite a bit. If you press Q, you get transported into MSX DOS, which is actually residing on this card. It's really weird because this card has MSX files on it, Commodore 64 files. It really is a hybrid. You can actually use the MSX DOS to do file operation on the Commodore 64 files and stuff. It really is a very kind of mind-fucking thing. So Rom Load spman b.rom/r to run it. It may actually be possible to use that fancy new stuff that that automatic Rom loading thing that Patrick was actually using a while ago. But yeah, Spaceman Bow. And of course it's running. Let's power cycle it again. So yeah, it's a very capable machine. What else is on here? PC Engine. And it basically suffers from the same error. PC Engine, PCE. Afterburner 2. And there you have it. Oh, and of course I try a game that has significant errors. Let's power cycle it because there's, it's not complete. So load the core. I think blazing lasers does work. Go to PCE and then blazing lasers. I think that does work. Yep. Isn't that something? It's a bit of a wired mess, but yeah. So, been enjoying a quiet evening in the study with the Turbo Chameleon 64. Yeah, and a core that I totally forgot to show you guys is actually, it also doubles as a VIC-20. So let's make it boot up and let's launch the VIC-20 core. What is it? VIC-20, Chameleon VIC-20. So it boots up as a VIC-20 and it starts to load the mega card ROM. I've got one of these VIC-20 mega cards, and I was actually able to dump that, and it actually is a card containing the entire library, or a lot of the library of the VIC-20, a lot of cartridge games, but it also does disk and memory expansion and stuff. So excellent stuff. Of course, this is a 0.9 release dating back from 2014, but it actually manages to boot the mega card. Once it's loaded in, it's actually quite a huge card, so it must be loaded into memory. But there it is, just like it would appear on a VIC-20. So you're actually able to navigate the menu with one of the joysticks. So let's check out one of the cartridge games. For example, Centipede, no, Defender. Start. And there we have Defender. Bloody hell. If you press reset, it actually resets back to the cartridge menu. So basically this actually functions as a, let me see, what do we have? Centipede. F1. And there we have Centipede. Cool stuff, isn't it? Wow! Whilst being seated on my spinal tap cushion. Oh, and you probably will hear that's the trash van that is actually taking up the trash. third video. I'm spamming, but I wanted to show you that over there. I got a case, a protective case for use on my Chameleon 64, Turbo Chameleon 64 setup. And this came from Canada a while ago, but I forgot to show it because I fell down the stairs. So yeah, I managed to put it on, and I'll just quickly show you what it looks like. And it actually looks like this. This part was exposed, and you can put a little. There's a little door. You can actually see there's all sorts of exposed parts. There's actually connectors for a Commodore 64 keyboard, an Amiga keyboard, and stuff. And this is a 3D printed case, which is slightly different than the yellow case of the Turbo Chameleon 64. And this is what it looks like without the case on, and yeah, there's a ton of pins exposed, which is not very nice. But it basically turns it into a very nice closed off computer. Okay, so this is actually where I got the 3D printed case. I got it at corei64.com. If you search for Turbo 64 Chameleon dock case, you'll be able to find it. It's $28. You can get it in black, and you can get it in yellow. I think in yellow it looks best. It looks a lot nicer, and it also comes with an extra cover covering up that little hole that you see over here on the top. You can take that out if you want, for example, to hook up a C64 keyboard like so. Yeah, I prefer the yellow version, but some might prefer the black version, and I think this really makes it quite a difference to your Turbo Chameleon 64 dock. So yeah, I'd recommend buying this. I mean, this is not a sponsored video. This is just my own opinion. So yeah, for you guys to go check it out if you have a Turbo Chameleon 64 dock. It's an FPGA system that actually is a Commodore 64 cartridge, but basically can actually function as a Commodore 64 itself. It has its own graphics output, and that's VGA. It has its own sound output, that's a jack plug, and it has a multifunctional connector for keyboard, mouse, but also the serial connector. So it basically functions as a complete Commodore 64, but it does more because it also does Amiga. It functions as a mini-mig FPGA, but it also does MSX, TurboGrafx 16. It's a great system. I've put up some other videos on it, and actually this somehow replaced my Amiga 1200 because that's still waiting for different caps. And it also replaces, to some extent, my new C64 re-release. It uses a new motherboard, and I just have it standing over here. I use those intermittently, and of course I've hooked up to reproduction Competition Pro joysticks, and it's just amazing. You know, you turn on the TV. Let me see if it, yeah. I turn on the sound, and I flick on the power switch. The sound probably was turned on, and if all goes well, the mini-mig will output something on the screen. Yes. I've changed the default color so it's actually a bit more visible. This basically goes into Commodore 64 compatible mode. You can reset to basic, and then it basically functions as a Commodore 64. As you can see, the border is a bit offset. That's something that I not necessarily like that much, but it is what it is. I think it's the same border height on the top as it is in the NTSC mode. You can actually put it into an NTSC mode and into a PAL mode. You can these are reset buttons and all sorts of things, but you can actually do a file browser. I've shown this before, but basically everything that's on the SD card, which is over there, that little blue thing, everything that's on the SD card is actually accessible from all cores. So you can actually browse MSX, ROMs and files, but they won't work with the C64 core being active. So if I move to my C64 version, I can actually run cartridge files. I can mount disk images. These are actually my own disks that I transferred. I can run binaries that aren't stored in any file, not in a tape file system or a disk file system. These are just raw binary files, and these are tape images. But if you want to do something else with the little machine, you can by pressing one of the reset buttons. Let me see, your X button. You can load a different core. And I'm actually using an old core, but it still works. It's the Beta 9C. I believe it's all the way up to a Beta 9F now, but I've not had the heart to actually change that around because I'm quite happy how it functions. There's an Amiga emulator that you can use, the Minimig, and you can actually you can do that, and you can actually insert floppy disks and all sorts of stuff, disk images and stuff. But yeah, it's great. I mean, it does an Amiga 500 or Amiga 600 to some extent. No Amiga 1200, but I've seen some alpha releases of an Amiga 1200 core, but yeah, this is an older card, so not a lot of software will still be developed for it. VIC-20, actually, that is actually quite cool, because the VIC-20, I also have a Megacard ROM, a Megacard game. What is a cartridge, which actually is loaded into the emulator as we are looking at it now. And what it does is actually that it provides this emulated VIC-20 with just about the entire software range of commercially available software titles. And I'm able to just play them on the emulator, or on the emulator, well, on the hardware implementation. It's a re-implementation of the original hardware. So yeah, so it's basically like playing it on a VIC. And yeah, the only thing that actually makes a difference is the fact that you can actually see some debug information, program counters and stuff. And it's still loading in. And now it actually executes the games. Let me see, a familiar game probably. Defender, for example. And that's Defender, and you'll be able to play Defender. Isn't that amazing? Now, that's enough about the that probably will be enough about the Minimig, or the Minimig, the Turbo Chameleon 64. But you can imagine that something like this easily replaces well, a lot of the original hardware in a good way. I'm very fascinated by emulators, but also very fascinated by things like this, because this basically does the same thing as the real hardware, but only provides different interfaces. You know, this actually provides VGA out, and it allows you to hook up a semi-modern keyboard. And I just love this faux. Dell IBM keyboard, because it really is a very nice keyboard. I don't think it has switches. I think it's a rubber dome keyboard, but still, it's a very nice keyboard, and I really like it. And yeah, as you can see, it just works. And I've yet to check hooking up a real 1541 up to it to see if that actually works. But yeah, I mean, you can do all sorts of file operations on the Well, the cool thing about, yeah, and I just want to finally boot up the MSX. Let me see, does it work? Weird that this doesn't work now. Yeah, it's a bit temperamental. Yeah, now it works. Load core. The open MSX. Now this will try to load the BIOS from SD card, but it just tries to do it too quickly, so I just press a button and then it actually recognizes the SD card, and then it loads the BIOS, and it becomes an MSX 2 Plus with a lot of RAM, and it defaults into a very nice file manager system, which basically is an MS-DOS command line well, MSX-DOS and MS-DOS are very similar, but you can do all sorts of file operations on the entire system using file management systems. Now, like MS-DOS, it has a restriction that it only sees 8 characters. It's a FAT32 or a FAT16 file system, but it doesn't do long file names. So that's the only downside to using this system to actually manipulate your files. But I find it so amazing that in a single small structure, all these computers, all these systems come together and they operate off a single file system. I just find that awesome, you know. If I try to go back and imagine in my brain what it would have been like to have something sitting like this on your desk, have a monitor like this, you know, way back in the 80s, and people coming by and say, oh yeah, this is my computer, it does everything, you know, people would have been blown away. And I think it's good if you're still blown away by what this actually is and how it is all possible, you know. PC Engine, Spectrum, Atari 800, Atari 5200, Commodore 64, MSX, VIC-20, you know, there's a ton of stuff on here, and it just runs, and it's great. Now, if you are trying to go into one of these, you know, try to invest in one of these FPGA systems, you could go for a Turbo Chameleon 64. You could actually stick this in a Commodore 64, like this one, and it will work as a Commodore 64 cartridge, and actually you'll be able to use it as a Commodore 64 cartridge. You'll be able to hook up the VGA to a monitor, and the output of the real Commodore 64 will actually be mimicked by the Turbo Chameleon, and it will output to VGA. So that's actually a way to hook up, this cartridge actually is a way to hook up a VGA monitor to a real C64. But this cartridge has become so much more than just a cartridge, because it has become the C64 itself, and even more than that, you know. I would have loved to see this actually also do the C128, for example. But yeah, interest has waned. I think the last core that came out was perhaps 1 or 2 years ago. So development on the Turbo Chameleon has more or less stalled, but that's also because the system wasn't available. This cartridge wasn't available by individual computers for a long time, and I believe that they're actually issuing a re-release of the system, and that may actually put some more interest back into this system. But there's a ton of other. Oh look, this is a screen. This actually has a screensaver, an MSX screensaver running on the Turbo Chameleon 64, protecting a Samsung screen that just wasn't around when the MSX was. But yeah, if they are going to produce some more of these Turbo Chameleon 64 cartridges, that would actually be awesome, because perhaps it would reinterest a lot of the people into making more cores available, or newer cores available for the system. Because all these all these FPGA systems, they share a commonality, that is the language that you use to program an FPGA. And where the FPGA, the field programmable grid array, where they differ is in which manners they interface with the exterior. You know, how is input collected? You know, how is that implemented? How is video in and output implemented? And in those parts, these systems differ greatly. And of course also in the FPGA chips themselves, because they are of different complexities. And if you have a very cheap FPGA chip, you can only implement very simple hardware structures. And if you have a very high-end FPGA, you can implement something like an Amiga 1200 or a very complex. Oh, look at that! There's some fish swimming to the screen. A pixelated fish. I love it. And it's one of the first virtual aquaria. Oh, look at that. But yeah, I find that interesting, and I think it's also a way to preserve our old systems, you know, to have new FPGA systems with, you know, modern hookups. I believe these joystick 9-pin joystick interfaces, these are actually just serial port connectors. They have the same form factor. Or you can use something like this. Yeah, it's way back down over here. It's a re-implementation of a Commodore 64 motherboard, but it uses the original chips to some extent. And yeah, so you actually use. Oh, look, there's a second fish coming into screen. So you use modern hardware to implement older systems, and it keeps them available. So I'm actually quite a fan of this FPGA like things, but what I'm not a fan of, at the same time I am, is the fact that you just have this spaghetti mess. I mean, this doesn't look tidy at all, but it does look a lot nicer now that it is encased a bit more. And you can put it behind the TV, but you will have to have access to the buttons, to the reset buttons, and you know, the LEDs and stuff, so you can see what is going on. I would love to get one of these newer systems that is better supported, but I don't know where to begin. I would love to have a system that does my Amiga 1200, so I can actually transport my ailing Amiga 1200 stuff onto one of these, and just have that as a functioning system, and try to save my Amiga by replacing the caps and working on it. So yeah, this is just me rambling on about my FPGAs and stuff. Yeah, I just have some time on my hand, and it's a very gray day, so I thought, let's show you some of the stuff that keeps me occupied and keeps me busy. So yeah. Okay, Mark signing off, and I'll be back with another video soon.